We are now joined from the UK by Patrick Henningsen, coming to us from Great Britain. Patrick, welcome to CN Live.
Great to be with you, Joe. Great to be with you, Elizabeth.
Patrick is the editor of 21st Century Wire, one of the must-read alternative sites out there. Patrick's been plugged into the case of Julian Assange from a long time back. He was previously inside the courtroom and then outside when the last time Julian appeared. He did not go in this week, but he has a keen eye of what's happening. So, Patrick, what do you think were the main takeaways from that appearance in the courtroom on Monday with Julian Assange?
I thought it was really interesting. It seemed to be, in many ways, a repeat of the previous hearings. This was a case schedule hearing, so what it was designed to do was to lay out the schedule for the coming 10 weeks or so, the coming 3 months, and that both sides would agree on a schedule and when they were going to present what and so forth. And then when the hearing, the most important thing probably from the Assange defense side is when the hearing was going to begin, because obviously they're up against the clock in terms of the time. And the arguments that were put forth, maybe not convincingly enough or not enough to convince this judge, was that Julian Assange has not been granted adequate time, materials, access to his legal team, etc., in order to prepare for his defense. What makes this most shocking, really, is that if you think of the gravity of this case as a precedent case, that it will affect the press, free press, free speech, international jurisdiction issues, all of these things. How can you not have enough time to prepare for something with that amount of importance globally? It's just unbelievable. And even if those cards were stacked against Assange, which clearly they are, and of course the state's making no bones about that, still, at least to give the appearance of reciprocity or fair play in this case, that they can prepare a defense. I mean, the British state and the American state would look a whole lot better if they would be at least seen to be playing fair at this stage. But this shows you the level of the authoritarian sort of aspect of it. They don't care. You're not going to get a day extra to prep for this. It's unbelievable.
And this is just such a transparently unfair process that you say they would look better if they actually at least went through the motions. First of all, the guy's in a high security, high max prison where violent criminals, he's not accused of a violent crime. He's there. He served his time already for that bail jumping. Again, another nonviolent crime. And now he's being held simply on remand until the extradition request is adjudicated. There's no reason he should be in that prison. That is so obvious right there. It's unfair. Number two, people's accounts from inside the courtroom was that this judge, her face lit up whenever the American lawyers said something, and she gave a lot of attention and sort of just condescendingly looked at Julian's defense team and Julian himself. You say that they could look better if they pretended, but you know what? It's the press. The mainstream media is not seeing it the way you see it, Patrick, the way we see it. They are not calling this out as the incredibly unfair process that it is, right? This is the issue. That's why they get away with it, in my opinion. Because they've got the cover.
No, I think we can resign ourselves to the fact that the press does not consider Julian Assange as a colleague. They don't. He's been completely reframed away from being a journalist or publisher or anything like that to being cyber criminal, sex criminal, etc. And WikiLeaks has been reframed not to be a media outlet, not to be a publisher, but to be some sort of rogue, reckless outlet that's publishing classified information illegally and so forth, and they need to be brought to heel. That's how it's been reframed. So this is why you're not going to get any pushback or coverage, for that matter, from the press, and they're so disinterested in this case, because in their minds, and this goes right to the top of the Guardian, Catherine Viner, all the way down. They don't see this as affecting them at all. if you can believe that. That's quite an amazing thing if you think about that. And ditto for Dean Baquet at the New York Times, and whoever's the editor of the Washington Post these days. I mean, all the majors should be absolutely honed in on this case, like every aspect of it. They should be just pulling it apart, looking at the minutia of it. That's how important it is to press media, but not only that, for digital publishing going forward in the 21st century, and for U.S. foreign policy, because this is a major foreign policy tool by the United States, being able to exert universal jurisdiction over borders against non-U.S. citizens and non-U.S. media outlets, and have, just complete control over the information space internationally with the long arm of the Department of Justice. I mean, it's and probably threatening countries with sanctions if they don't comply or give up said perpetrator who's been indicted. I mean, that's what you're looking at going forward. And so that's one thing. I mean, the other thing is that the press is absolutely derelict in the reporting of all of the steps that have come right up to this point, this last hearing. Julian Assange is being held as a Category A prisoner, not officially, but he's being treated exactly as a Category A violent criminal, violent felon in Belmarsh prison, and he's unconvicted. So he's being indefinitely detained. He's unconvicted. He served his time, whether you agree or not with the bail skipping charge. It's done. And he's still being held under an extradition order. And they've said because he's in danger of absconding. This is the words prosecutors have used. And that's not the case either. That, again, that's more reframing, because he sought asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, which is his human right. That is everyone's right, political asylum, according to many different conventions, internationally agreed treaties. Okay, this isn't just a flight of fancy, like, oh, I think I might be under threat of some other crime, or I'm running from the law, so I'm going to accept political asylum. Ecuador didn't do that casually. That was considered, and they probably went through quite a few administrative processes with the Ecuadorian government to make sure that that was a good move for them as a state, because he was a high-profile fugitive, as it were, at that time from the British justice system. But, bail skipping charges, I don't even want to get into that, but the majority of people, even with no priors, to be thrown in a Belmarsh prison on a bail skipping charge that doesn't even follow through with the majority of people who have skipped bail in the UK in the last few years. You can just look at the records. We've published a legal analysis on all of these points at 21st Century Wire by Nina Cross, who's been working very hard on this case. And so even in the prison service's own directives, I think it's clause 6400. I don't have the exact name of the clause, but it's on our article on 21st Century Wire that specifically states what a non-category A prisoner, an unconvicted, somebody who's waiting, should have full access, as many visits as they want. They should have a computer. They should be able to have telephone access, unlimited legal representative meetings, etc., and so forth. And they're in their own clothes. They should be able to conduct day-to-day businesses. In other words, if somebody has a business outside of prison, if they were, an unconvicted, non-category A prisoner on whatever he's being held on right now, he should have almost complete freedom other than movement if he's being detained according to the prison system on directives. So there's a double standard at play. He's being treated very differently. He's being treated like a terrorist. That's no exaggeration. And so that's a wrong. And on that basis alone, his defense team has an incredibly strong argument that this is a miscarriage of justice. There's no doubt about it. You can't, there's no argument that the state can make to say that he's being treated fairly or equitably. And even his own words, it was sad to hear him plea for equity when he was given a chance to speak in the last hearing. I mean, he's right. Everything he said is absolutely correct about how the United States has unlimited resources, unlimited time, 10 years to prepare a case, and he's not even been given the minimum, not even the minimum under his rights in the justice system in Britain. It's incredible.
Do you know if his lawyers have filed a motion about that, that he's not being held according to the law, that it should be an open and shut case right there, that decision?
I don't know. I don't know if they have or not. I mean, that's probably a question that
Yeah.
you could put to
I hope
somebody
that they
maybe
have.
closer
I
to his
mean,
legal team.
you're
But
absolutely right. That's a line that they have to take, obviously. Marty Baron, by the way, is the editor of the Washington Post. And I bring that up again because you made an interesting comment about the Viner at the Guardian and Barron and Beckett at the Times. They don't feel personally threatened by this. They're not, so they don't care. But this is not how journalists are supposed to think about what's good for me. They have a public, they have a readership that they're supposed to be serving. This is important for the public to know about what's going on here, not whether it affects their careers or not. I mean, that's an unbelievable indictment you made of them, and I don't doubt that that's part of their motivation, but I think it goes it's worse than that. They are serving the state, the interests of the state. And this guy cannot be allowed to get away with uncovering crimes of the state. They are there to protect the powerful interests. They see themselves as aligned with those powerful interests. This is even a greater indictment of the media, isn't it?
the indictment of the press, I'll go even further than that, Joe, that the corporate media, and that includes state corporations like the BBC, the corporate media are no longer press. They don't serve that function anymore. They are PR. They do public relations for other corporations and for the state. Their loyalty is not to finding the truth or following where the facts take them, where the evidence take them. Their loyalty is to that statement that's issued by a government agency or by a corporation, and say that's it. And there's protesters out on the street, and well, how many protesters are out in the street? That's about as far as it goes. So yeah, I mean, we can drag the press over the coals, but the other thing is this case has taken an interesting turn, and the Spanish media outlet El País has reported something that should have been a game changer really at the end of September, which is that the U.S. government, the CIA, effectively subcontracted this private security company who was originally contracted by the Ecuadorian government to provide security for the Ecuadorian embassy there in London. And then they were double dipping with the CIA. They were running security and being paid by them, and to spy on Julian Assange, his family, his friends, etc. So immediately that reframes this whole, that story, because what it does is that kind of proves that this is a political persecution. Of course, the U.S.'s argument is that it's a criminal offense that Julian Assange has done, and they have stacks and stacks of indictments to try to convince the public that it's a criminal offense. When in fact, when you look at, any judge should be able to look at that new evidence that would be submitted, that this is a political targeting. He's a political prisoner. Therefore, he cannot be extradited to the United States according to the treaty between Britain and the United States. Article 4 of the extradition treaty specifically prohibits extradition on the basis of being a political prisoner or a political offense. So I think that's pretty clear. And you could make that argument before the El País revelation, but I think now you can absolutely make it's a prima facie argument now. There's no question about it. And I don't know whether the judge is going to recognize that or not. I mean, you got the situation where one judge is going to decide the future of press, media, asylum law, extradition law. It's coming down to what the whims of one person. I don't know. That's the way I
There's
look
one
at it.
other important thing in that El País story is that the CIA got videos of him talking with his lawyers, his psychologists, his doctors, every visitor, except Paul Manafort, by the way. Where's that video? It's the one I want to see.
Those are the secret tapes. Only Luke Harding has those tapes.
Only Luke has them.
And
That's
that's
right.
on a need-to-know basis.
Right. Okay. Thanks for explaining that, Patrick. This guy wrote a book called Collusion. That was the title. It was a #1 bestseller in the New York Times. The Mueller investigation found no collusion. He went out on a tremendous limb. His reputation was on the line. He had to grab that absolute bullshit story of Paul Manafort going in there. I'm just saying that If they have the tapes of every visitor, they've got that one. And if they really cared about Luke Harding, the CIA would release that one. But I want to get back to the most serious issue here, which is the attorney-client privilege was violated there. When you've got the government that is trying to get him extradited, that wants to prosecute him, that very same government has listened in on his conversations with his lawyers. This should be immediately thrown out. But one problem is they don't have all the evidence yet from the Spanish investigation. So WikiLeaks was arguing to the lawyers that they wanted an extension of the hearing phase. It's beginning in February 25, so they could get that evidence, so they can make a motion to have it thrown out. And the judge won't give them that extension, correct?
Right. That's a big problem. I think the state has exposed itself by not granting an extension on that basis or for the other reasons I mentioned previously. But I think they've really exposed themselves here. I think this is being handled very poorly. And I know that might sound like a cliche, but it's being handled surprisingly very poorly and very ham-fisted by the U.S., but also by the British justice system as well. I mean, the U.S. has no case. The U.S. has no case. And I think the proof of that is the fact that they're putting Chelsea Manning on lockdown and fining her whatever, $1,000 a day. And Jeremy Hammond, they're fishing for someone to turn state's evidence against Assange. That's all they're doing. This is like a bad mob film, with the FBI witness protection program, or, it's a bad film. They have no case. If they had a case, they wouldn't need to do any of that. In fact, there's so much discovery that came out in the Manning case already, and it's 10 years old. I mean, if it's not there, it's not there. What are they doing? I think they're really desperate to really nail it, and they don't have it. And I think a lot of people are starting to recognize that now. And I don't know where this is going to end up, but that could work in Julian Assange's favor later, perhaps. I don't know. But there's a number of problems with the extradition itself. That's going to send a very bad message to the world about British justice. And I don't care what the U.S. claims it has or how many indictments the DOJ has typed out. It's going to send a very bad message about what British values are internationally to the rest of the world, because Britain still it has to maintain a higher ethical standard than the United States. A lot of people have written off the U.S. as a kind of a lawless, imperialist power globally, but not Britain. And this is a big, big problem. I don't know. I just don't, to collude with the U.S. on that level. I can't see how it's going to benefit the UK in the public relations terms. It's really diplomatic terms.
From my perspective, it seems like they don't care. It doesn't seem to me that, from what we've seen, that they have any sense of propriety in the way that they're doing this. As you and Joe both mentioned earlier, if they cared about that as a priority, they would have been doing this in a way that even had a semblance of fairness. And that brings me to a question I wanted to ask you, which was, given the proceedings that you've witnessed yourself and given the proceedings that we have heard about on Monday and seen reported, what does this tell us about the way that the extradition process is going to go? I mean, personally, myself, it seems to me that this tells us that this is going to go through almost immediately with almost no pause whatsoever, without even so much as blinking at it. Is that your take as well? And what is your perspective on how it will
That's what it looks like right now. It absolutely looks like that. It looks like it's just everything's being rubber stamped and waved through all the way through. And to have Americans coming into British courts, or representatives of America coming into British courts and just saying that's the law according to Washington, that's reality according to Washington, and just have the judge sit there and nod and say, yes, okay, fine, next. That's basically what it was that I witnessed there. So, but here's the problem. The problem is we're having this argument and we're pulling hair out about this, but and I always said this is an important thing, is that courts don't exist. It's not a vacuum of reality. What happens outside the court matters. And so public opinion matters. It does affect the way judges rule on things. And the fact that the press is not engaged and the press is not involved, as Joe was mentioning before, this is really important, and this is why you were not seeing justice. I really think that you cannot have a functioning democratic society or public or whatever, unless you have a functioning fourth estate. If you don't have a functioning fourth estate, everything breaks down. That's one of the most important checks and balances. And I think that's one of the fundamental core realizations of this story in this case, is we're seeing it on so many levels, not just the persecution of Julian Assange, the man, and WikiLeaks as the media outlet, but you're seeing also the complete just abandonment of this story and what it means, and the injustices and the miscarriage of justices by the larger media, the industry. And that, so the public opinion won't be activated, therefore the public pressure won't be activated, therefore what happens inside the courtroom will just carry on without any consequences whatsoever, because that's the only reason why a judge would rule differently, or that the system would act differently if they felt that it was going to basically cause a crisis of public confidence in the institution. That's not happening.
That's such an important point. It's such a complete breakdown. And I think that it is really important to remember, if it wasn't somebody, one single Rutley cameraman chasing down the transport vehicle that Assange was in, we wouldn't have a single image of him from Monday. I mean, it's, you can't say it's intentional collusion to cover up the case, but it does seem that there has been a really conscious lack of interest, as you're saying, by the media that is definitely allowing this to continue. I know that you weren't in the courtroom on Monday, but going from the reports we do have about what was said and the way that Assange spoke and the fact that he seemed to have trouble speaking, do you have any comment on that and differences between the proceedings that you did witness yourself earlier?
Yeah, I'm sad I wasn't there, but I couldn't be for this occasion. But having read the transcripts of what was said during the hearing, I don't care what anybody says, and how brilliant Julian Assange is, and how resilient he is, and he's all of those things clearly to have survived so far. But it does take its toll. Solitary confinement, being restricted to communicate with people, or to have intellectual conversations, or to eat the right food, or just being trapped and being imprisoned for somebody that values their liberty and freedom so much as Assange does. It's going to have a physical and mental and psychological toll that's going to be taken on him over years. It's just going to grind down the individual to the point where you're not going to be able to function like normal, and possibly worse. And I think we're starting to see that. That's very worrying. That's a very real problem. It's a very real situation. And especially in his case, this is a major political voice. This is a major dissident voice in society, in Western society. It's not just anybody. He's an intellectual. He's a journalist. He plays an important role in society. So to see him not 100% or not 50%, and maybe going downhill because of the way he's being treated by the justice system is very concerning. Very concerning. I'm sure his family's horrified, without a doubt.
He was able to wave back, apparently, to his supporters who were in the gallery. Is encouraging. He can recognize that there. I remember seeing some of his last TV interviews from inside the embassy, and I could already tell that he was having a hard time with his train of thought, from having seen him over the years. That he never had a problem like that. So that was already disturbing. But to see him now deteriorated like this, I'm a little bit hesitant, but I want to raise this issue. It's complete speculation. When it came out, we at Consortium News decided not to write anything about it, not to mention it. And I still think we're not going to put anything in print about it, but I just want to throw it out there. And that was, well, I had the feeling that they wanted their hands. I mean, the British and American intelligence services wanted their hands on this guy since the very beginning, since 2006. Now they finally got him. I mean, this is a huge prize that Ecuador was sitting on, which is why I also said from the beginning that they were going to try to get something from the U.S. in exchange for him. They're not going to give him up. So now they've got him, and they clearly want to go after people around him and indict other people if they can. That could also be part of why they're holding on. certainly Hammond and maybe even Chelsea. So this is not just about Julian. That's really dangerous. They want to destroy the organization. They don't want to just get him. So I thought if they got their hands on him, they're going to want to interrogate him to get what they can from him. Now, they're not going to wait till he's extradited a year or two later and then he comes to Washington. They're not following procedures. They're going to try to. But I asked John Pilger, who visited him, and he and others have said there's no information or evidence at all that he's been interrogated. That could have been done without his lawyers present, which would probably be the case. So I just wanted to ask you about that. And then the story that was controversial, that I still don't buy, but there's the idea that he may be giving us some kind of truth serum, that when his questioning is over, he would have no memory of it. So that there's no evidence that he could have been interrogated. Because it does seem like they wouldn't mind if he did not come out of that prison, Patrick. They would avoid the media circus that will go around him here in the U.S. if he comes here to Alexandria. The fact that this will be controversial, it's controversial in Britain, and even more so. So it might be, if they got what they needed from him, it might be better if he doesn't walk out of there to avoid this entire mess. This is just a thought I had. What do you think?
That should be a concern for everybody, that the most convenient outcome for all the belligerent parties, say belligerent, I might sound biased there, but that's the word I'll use. For all the belligerent parties, the most convenient outcome is that he doesn't walk out of Belmarsh prison. And that would get everybody off the hook. It would get Britain off the hook. It would get the U.S. off the hook. It would get Sweden off the hook. And it would get the Moreno government off the hook as
and
well
the press
for selling him out. So that's a problem that is very real, and he could be under a major health challenge for a number of reasons. The people tossed around the theory that he's been administered BZ, narcotic or opiate, whatever. And I've seen that claim made by an American woman, former Air Force doctor or something. Now, there's no evidence to prove that. And but like you said, he is a high value national security target for the U.S., for the Five Eyes alliance countries, and they would be in all their interests to share intelligence that would be able to compromise WikiLeaks, for instance. That would be the most important thing, is how to disable WikiLeaks, and physically to disable it as an outlet, or break it up, or sabotage it, or something like that.
I don't think they'd want him to die until they've gotten the information out of him that they need. That's the quandary there that I can't resolve. I also don't buy that. There's no evidence that he was given this drug. I'm just speculating here. If he does die and they don't care to keep him alive, it means they probably have interrogated him in some way.
I couldn't say. I don't know.
Yeah.
About that. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that he hasn't been interrogated. Then it's from a political point of view. You look at other high-value detainees, and it's 100% better for the state not to have to answer, or for them not to be doing speaking tours after they've been released. Or imagine Chelsea Manning going on a speaking tour right now. Imagine Julian Assange going on a world tour after he's been acquitted. I mean, it'll be devastating. It'll be devastating for the Obama administration, for the Trump administration, for the British government, for Sweden, for Ecuador. I mean, so I think that's more of a priority for them now, even than the technical concerns they might have about WikiLeaks and its system and its organization. Politically, it would be very bad for the Western intelligence alliance and states. And plus, they've already dug themselves a huge hole. They've tripled down on this situation already, to the point where it's clearly a miscarriage of justice for anybody that's paid attention. And they're banking on the fact that not many people are paying attention. They can sort of carry on and get away with this. But also, the other reason why there's a motivation that he wouldn't walk out of there is the U.S. would Well, I personally believe that they do not want to put the 1917 Espionage Act to the test on anything that could be considered journalism or media, and they have done before. They've arrested and incarcerated Eugene Debs for making an anti-war speech. They have gone after people politically under the Espionage Act in U.S. history, but those were different times, and this is a different case.
And it was
There's a
about
lot
the
more at
draft.
stake
It was
here, I
about the
think.
draft. They went
Yeah,
after publication like the masses in 1919, I believe, but that was because they opposed the draft in World War One. Never has a journalist been charged under the Espionage Act before now for simply possessing and disseminating classified information. That never happened before. And that's the part of the act that should be challenged all the way to the Supreme Court. Not that I have faith in the Supreme Court, but that clearly bumps up against the First Amendment. But it's still on the books. That's why they are charging him under that. And you're right; they wouldn't necessarily want that to go to trial here because his lawyers would make that appeal, make an issue of that anyway, and it could get public support. That kind of just on that point.
it will. It will absolutely get, once that button is pushed, it will become an issue, especially in the United States. And the ACLU and everybody, they have people queued up who would be dying to get involved in this case from a legal point of view, just for a number of reasons, if not to go up against the Trump administration and the Trump DOJ. There's plenty of people on the left that would like nothing more than to have that opportunity. But from an international perspective, there's more than just the Espionage Act here. There's all of these things, the abrogation of international treaties that protect people on asylum, taking his citizenship away, which Ecuador did, political prosecutions, which clearly the collusion between Sweden and the UK, it's clear as day. They colluded in order to keep him on ice, as it were, to give the U.S. enough time to do what it wanted to do to create their case. So all these countries have been working together. That's very clear. So internationally, we have another problem here, which is that does international law apply? Do international treaties apply? And the current administration and the Obama administration was the same. The Obama administration was realism light. Here you have more of a hard realism with the Trump administration, where international law does not apply to, it only applies where we say it applies. And why? Because we're stronger as a power and we have more leverage. And I'm talking about the U.S. Treasury Department as a new weapon of war internationally with sanctions. And so that's how America's dictating policy right now, is through the U.S. Treasury Department, through OFAC. And so they're ignoring, so the liberal internationalists who should be pulling their hair out, thinking, why aren't we recognizing or respecting all of these international conventions and treaties? Where are the Samantha Powers of the world arguing this case? Where are the Susan Rices of the world? All these great political, legal minds, supposedly on the liberal left with foreign policy and so forth, human rights. Where are they all? They've all run. They're nowhere to be found. Nobody from that class, a political class of American leftists, so-called leftists, as you said previously, Joe, I know you made comments about how the Clinton administration moved the Democratic Party, right past the center into the right wing. So, but that aside, where are these people arguing for what is clearly, this is the open goal of all open goals, to take out the Trump administration on a matter of principle, because he's planning to lay waste to the First Amendment of the United States. I mean, there's no bigger open goal in political terms right now than the one that's sitting there with this case.
That's
But
a complicated question for Susan Rice and Samantha Power. Two women I know very well because I interact with them all the time at the UN.
Yeah.
And I never had a lot of respect for Samantha Power at all, I'll tell you that. Rice has something. They are not going to go forward on this to support, even though it would be a great attack on the Trump administration, because they believe Julian's role in the 2016 election was to give us Trump. So why, if that's the case, why is Trump going after him, by the way? He should be kissing his feet, not indicting him.
I think from a political point of view, Donald Trump is was so traumatized probably by to have Russiagate in the rearview mirror. He's probably just relieved, doesn't want to go back in there and be accused of where it was in 2017, basically, which must have been horrific. It was a minute by minute attack for months on end. So maybe he's just afraid of, he's that cloud's still hanging over his head in the background. But I think the reason the powers and the Rices of the world, and those are just two examples. I mean, there's many other people that you could put in that group of Barack Obama, the constitutional scholar from Harvard University. I'll put him in that category as well. They're protecting the permanent state in the United States. They're protecting the empire, as it were, from the left side. Forget about the 2016 elections. It's what Assange and WikiLeaks represent in terms of having an independent media outlet floating out in cyberspace who could receive leaks of classified documents showing war crimes by U.S. agencies or soldiers. I mean, that challenges the authority and the credibility of the world superpower globally. And there's no way to control it. And how do we keep a lid on that? It's that even overrides even the concerns, the political concerns of the 2016 election. But the 2016 election is obviously a big roadblock that's been thrown in front of this case that's kept the left from pursuing the Trump administration on this, which is sad. And it shows you how shallow American politics has gotten, that they'll even throw away the most valuable aspect of the US Constitution, which is the First Amendment. Like I said, without a free press, without the protection of speech and press, the whole system becomes dysfunctional. And that's what you'll see more of in America if they pursue this all the way down the line.
Obviously, the prosecution of Assange right now has nothing to do with 2016, has nothing to do with Russiagate at all. And yet that still seems, as you're saying, that still is a cloud that's hanging over this whole proceeding. We still have The Guardian not withdrawing its bogus article about Manafort, as Joe referenced earlier. To what extent do you think this case has been disentangled or not from Russiagate, from those lies that the media hawked for 2+ straight years? To what extent do you think people have really conflated Russiagate with the current proceedings against Assange? Joe
or Consortium News could probably tell anybody better than anyone could of how flimsy and thin the whole Russian hacking story is with WikiLeaks, and to try to pin that on WikiLeaks and Assange for basically being a go-between between the Kremlin and the Trump campaign to give Donald Trump his liftoff into office. It collapses very quickly when you look at it. I think politically, I think a stronger factor with the lack of left-wing support or progressive support for Assange was really the whole framing of him as a sex criminal, because that's I think by orders of magnitude much more important and more powerful in keeping people from supporting him for fear of what the social studies calls, I forgot the term for it, but public approval or something, social acceptability factor. If you support someone who's been framed as a sex criminal, then social desirability goes right down down the drain. So this is what they've done to divide. They pit the feminists against him. The progressive left in general, no support at all, out of fear. And still people today I run into, and we talk about this case, and they said, but he was a rapist, and he was this and that. That's still imprinted in people's heads. And I think that's the most powerful deterrent for supporting this case, this man, this cause, was that. And you can say the same thing about how they engineered military interventions post-Iraq was done exactly the same way. I gave a presentation, a seminar about this in a university recently, of how meticulous the propaganda was in order to peel off certain sections of the anti-war left with Libya, for instance, Susan Rice playing a pivotal role in that by pushing out the story of Gaddafi issuing Viagra to his troops to commit mass rape. That was Susan Rice, by the way, who helped to launch that talking point.
She gave that briefing in a closed door Security Council meeting. I was outside, and then she had her minions come out and leak it. That's how it got into the public. It was a private meeting, and then it was leaked to the press.
And that was really important, because immediately that story transformed. It broke up the anti-war left immediately, took a section right off. And in Syria, they did a bunch of other examples of that. The gay girl Damascus hoax, and etc. There's so many of those that to divide, and Putin's targeting gays and hunting gays down in Moscow, and Assad's doing the same. So the LGBT lobby were immediately pro-regime change and pro-proxy war for Syria because of that. And so I'm just giving an example how powerful identity politics is in terms of managing the herd, as it were, of public support for and against. And I think that's been the biggest factor by the establishment, was able to turn the left, who feted Julian Assange. The liberal intelligentsia were, everyone wanted to get a bit of his stardust back in the day, back in 2008, 9, 10. There were queues of people, thousands of people coming to see him when he spoke, or at these conferences and panel discussions. And he was a rock star on the left.
And that was after he supposedly committed the crimes he's being charged with.
That's correct.
But he was exposing the Bush administration. This is a partisan thing all the way through.
There you go,
Once
Joe.
he heard Hillary, they want this guy
persona non grata.
Ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, they wanted him even before he hurt Hillary, but that was the knockout punch, was the 2016 election for him in this round. But you're right, Joe. When he opposed the Bush administration, when the anti-war left was cohesive, he was a hero, and he was protected by people in the press and the Guardian and liberal members of the press. And not anymore. That to me is the story within the story. If I was to write a history, historical review of this and how it transforms society, that's one of the most important pieces of that story. Is that process.
One of the things that would really back up what you're saying is Nils Meltzer's report, and the way that he really focuses in on that rape narrative and dismantling it very carefully, very methodically, and showing how it was the collusion of these multiple states to tar Assange that really led to that and reinforced it. So yeah, no, I completely agree with what you're saying. But I guess to ask my earlier question more precisely, it's that I guess what I see when I talk to people, in addition to that exact response that you described, where people go, oh, but the rape story, is that people also still think that he's actually being somehow prosecuted for Russia. I mean, it's so absolutely disconnected from reality that it shocks me. But to what extent do you see people actually conflating his current prosecution at the extradition request with Russiagate, with 2016? Because I still see that amongst the public.
I think more in America, you'll see that. Whereas in Britain, it's definitely sex crime. That's the kind of overriding narrative here. A lot of people still think that he was a fugitive from the Swedish government for rape charges. And so they did a really good job in sort of, burning that into the minds of the public in Britain and probably in Europe in general. Someone came up to me once recently and they said, is he still in there? Is he still in Belmarsh? They don't even know where he's being held. So it just shows you how there's a lack of interest here. And this goes back to our original point. I know it's obvious, but if it's not in the papers, if it's not on mainstream media, as powerful as alternative media is, we have a certain amount of reach collectively, all of these different independent media outlets and commentators and social media personalities. But the mainstream press gives it that sort of critical mass where it could actually, go one way or the other in history. And that hasn't happened in this case. It's so submerged. And so the numbers of people you see, although when Roger Waters played outside the Home Office in London, I was there at that gathering, and there was, a few thousand people out there. So that was the largest gathering in support of Julian Assange. I mean, those are numbers that are coming close to where he was at the peak of his fame on the liberal left, but it's a totally different crowd now, a totally different coalition of supporters than before, and it's not safe to support Julian Assange and WikiLeaks now as it was back then. It was trendy back then to be at the frontline club and all of this other stuff. But now it's much more of a risky thing to do. So the types of people that are very committed, I think the people that will come out and support him now are extremely committed. They understand what's at stake. It's definitely growing. The awareness is definitely growing. The commitment, the seriousness of a lot of the people is growing as well. So I think I'm still positive that something's going to break. I'm very hopeful because I've seen the support increase incrementally since the spring. So, the level of public awareness is much better, much higher. It's a very confusing political environment right now, domestically, politically in the U.S. and Europe and internationally, with Trump and Brexit and so forth, and all of the things going on in the Middle East and beyond. It's a very complex and confusing environment right now. For people to find space for this Julian Assange WikiLeaks issue is a challenge for a lot of people. But I think it's there. I don't think critical mass. It's not going to take as much as you might think to achieve critical mass in this case. I think it'd be a much smaller percentage of people, but active and highly aware politically can make a huge difference and could apply that amount of pressure that's needed for the judiciary to think twice about how they're going to rule on this in February. I really think so.
Well, Patrick, we hope you're right. It's hard to be optimistic, but there is a way, I suppose, especially in the face of what Elizabeth was saying, the smearing of him, not only on the sexual issues, but here in the U.S. on Russiagate, that this people probably, if you went into the street here, and I asked 10 people here in Alexandria, Virginia, where they want to bring him, and maybe 8 of them would say, well, because he worked for the Russians. I think that they think that this is what this is about. I'm just guessing, but that is, again, the failure of the media to explain the case properly has allowed that misconception. Patrick, it's terrific to hear from you again, and we'll have you back on, hopefully, to continue to talk about this as this case continues to unfold. So that was Patrick Henningsen from United Kingdom. Bye-bye.